Hello and welcome to this month's edition of The Player's Voice, where today we are in the birthplace of rugby at Rugby School for RPA Academy Induction Day. And this podcast this week is based all around player development and preparing for your life in rugby. I'm delighted to be joined today by Burrell, former England international and Premiership superstar.
It's very kind of you.
I like to, really blow some smoke at you before we start.
I like that.
And Cheyne, head of player development and wellbeing at the RPA. Lads, how are you? We're halfway through the day. We're on our lunch break. We've just had a delightful chili. Have you actually not eaten yet? Oh, shame. I've just had a delightful chili.
I've actually not eaten either.
Okay, so I've just had a delightful chili.
Of course, the front row, Maddie.
How have you found the morning, gents?
Yeah, it's been very good. First of all, nice to see you again.
And you, mate.
I mean, it's been a while since we stepped on that field together. It's great to see you doing great things, Beef, first and foremost. But it was a great morning, Luke. I think, obviously, what you guys at the RPA are doing, I was here last year and I saw the work that you were putting in then. And I just think, from what I've already seen this morning, it seems to be a project that's really growing for you. So thank you for inviting me down again and letting me be part of it, because it's really it's something that's close to me in terms of my pillars and what I represent is giving back to the next generation any way, shape, or form I can. So, I'm really enjoying it. One thing I can't get my head around is the size of some of these lads at 18 years old.
I was built like a kebab at 18.
It's just a bit daunting, isn't it?
It's mad. Some of these lads are giant, and it's sort of made me a little bit happy that I'm close to the end of my career than the start, because when these guys come into their own, it is going to be terrifying. But also, from a neutral perspective, entertaining.
It's great for the game, right? It's great for the game.
Brilliant for the game.
I mean, you can see that at 18 years old, the athletic development now is so much more than it was when I was coming through anyway. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. No.
Because you weren't very athletic, were you, when you burst onto the scene, mate?
I just straight up and down, mate. One direction. That's ball, mate. Nope. Chuck it up.
Tinge of sarcasm.
Yeah. So, mate, thank you for having me. And look, I've had a great morning so far. It's been great to see what you guys are up to.
Brilliant. Yeah, look, it's been obviously a turbulent year, hasn't it, for rugby? These events every year are always a massive part of our calendar. From the very outset of these young men's careers, we want to obviously give them a bit of an opportunity to open their eyes to the opportunities that are ahead of them as young professionals, but also the pitfalls that they might fall foul of if they don't look after themselves. And it's an opportunity really for us to give them an insight into people who've been there and done it, like both of yourselves, but more importantly as well, the support that's always going to be available to them as professional players, as RPA members now, as young players as they progress through their careers. And of course, when they do, the time does come to hang up their boots, and the support that continues beyond them days as well.
So it's when you're coming into this as an academy player, you come through school, you're at the top of the tree in school, you're the kid who's going to be a professional rugby player, you've got the world ahead of you, and you come to this environment and you are route one, blinkers on, I'm in professional rugby. Luke, how important is it, especially in sessions like these, to ensure that players understand there are so many different aspects to being not just a professional rugby player, but to being a human as you grow up? Because I think if we liken it to most other kids of those age, they're going off to university. They might be starting in a different career. They may be doing something else, but it's that rite of passage of leaving home and becoming truly independent. What kind of things on the syllabus? I think we'll call it a syllabus for today. We're in a school, aren't we?
Yeah. Okay.
Syllabus. What stuff on the syllabus today do you think is the most beneficial for these young players?
Well, you just hit a couple of them on the head, to be honest with you, Beef. I think for us, we recognise for these young players coming into a new environment, a professional environment, there's going to be a lot of challenges. We spoke in one of the sessions this morning. We'll speak more about this afternoon around me as a young player. What are some of the things that I need to do in order to prove myself, and not only from a rugby perspective, from a performance perspective, but kind of fitting in and culturally from an environment point of view. How do I really, am I able to be myself and, to grow in that sort of sense, with also recognising there's a pressure that might be on my shoulders and an expectation, not only from what I place onto myself as a young player, but also for those around me. And that might be kind of parents and friends at home going, you're a young player now playing for Northampton Saints, you're the next big thing, and they can already see the opportunities that come ahead of that. And I think from a gain line point of view, it's obviously our personal development and welfare program that exists to support players in their holistic development as human beings, as you've mentioned, is to recognise that rugby is very, very important. We recognise that, and we're not trying to downplay that at all. But we want to give them the opportunity to build pillars, if you want to use that word that Luther's used before, and that's certainly part of our syllabus, as we use the word pillar. To be good people, and hopefully off the back of that, performances will automatically follow. But we recognise there's a lot of things in their young careers that they won't have control over. There is going to be the risk that almost all players will go through where they're not selected, where they're injured, where they go through a poor patch of performances or results. And it's how can we give them the tools, and how can we allow them to develop the tools to enable them to be able to manage themselves appropriately and support the people around them when those things do happen. Because there's, the career in professional sport is an opportunity for lots of highs. Lots and lots of highs, but there's also an opportunity for lots of lows if you don't look after yourself and those around you. So I think that's a big part of it as well.
And Luther, you're hugely experienced in the game. You've played a lot of rugby. You've seen a lot of different cultures, a lot of different environments in the sport. We've sat through a couple of sessions this morning. Is there anything that, if you're talking to 18-year-old Luther now, is there anything that you've seen this morning that you would have liked to pass on to him?
So much. I'll tell you that. So much. I think society's evolved, for one. The nature of the sport has evolved massively. I wish this was around when I was coming through and I was leaving school. So I left school when I was 16 and I went straight into an academy system, and I left home when I was 17 years old, and I went straight into a house, and that was me. I had to try and make ends meet. It was really tough for me. I got myself into debt. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was trying to keep up appearances first and foremost, which didn't actually really matter. I was going into a real hostile environment. I think the first team centre at the time may have been Andre Sneijman, who's a bit of a beast of a South African player. So I was a bit like, how am I going to try and be like that guy? And I put an unprecedented amount of pressure on myself. And I think ultimately that's what led to a bit later development, because I got myself in some very sticky situations. So for me, one piece of advice I'd be saying to Luther Burrell, if he was in this era, would be use what you have at your disposal here, because what the RPA are offering is so rewarding as an 18-year-old lad. And I think the messages that we heard up there were things like, being able to escape and don't be defined by just the sport, because I've recently just come away. My last competitive game was the Barbarians, and what I loved about the Barbarians was it reminded me of why I loved it, because you get on the beers with the lads from people all over the world, and you just create this bond. And you have to create this bond because by the end of the week you're going to be going into war. But we did it the unorthodox way by eating pizzas and drinking alcohol. And we went out there and played against you guys, I think, actually. And it really reminded me as to why I loved the game as a young lad, where I didn't really have the pressure and it didn't define me. Does that make sense? Because ultimately I've come away from it, and essentially I feel that's defined me. Now, it doesn't take away the things that I've managed to achieve in my life. Of course, I'm very proud of that, but it overwhelmed my life. And if I could, I would be advising myself, my younger self, to take advantages of the things that are in place around me.
And just on the back of that, Beef, I think the other thing is that young people, we're all in our 30s now, but it's, that time from when you are 18 to when you're in your 30s goes like that. And a common message a lot of young players will say is, I need to focus on my rugby this year. I'll do that in the future. And all of a sudden the future comes along, and they then haven't maybe taken advantage of those opportunities in front of them. And they look back and go, I wish I did. So what we're not trying to do is detract away from rugby and say, this is all doom and gloom. There's the negatives that come in. This is what could go wrong. Make you aware of that, but also look at the fantastic opportunities that you get as part of the RPA, as part of the Gain Line program, through your personal development, your player development manager at your club, that are there to support you as individuals and as a collective group of people, so that when that time does come, that those things might be important. And that might be that you transition away from the game in the next 6 to 12 months. It might be that you transition away from the game in the next 6 to 12 years. You don't really know, but it's not just about the future when you're no longer a rugby player. It's how can I do things now that are going to help me as a person, as a player now. And one of the great examples of that from a game line perspective in this morning session is one of the young lads said, one of my real key focuses this year is actually passing my driving test. So it's not a case of, right, I come away from school and I have to go in to do a degree because that's what society is telling me I need to do. That's what parents are telling me to do. We're given the opportunity for these young players and these young people to explore who they are away from being a rugby player, because at this stage they probably know a little bit about what they are as a rugby player and what they bring to the table in terms of their attributes and what's required of them in terms of their position. But we want to give them an opportunity to explore their values, explore what's important to them. And that's going to look differently for everybody. Yeah. Some players won't know what that's going to look like yet, and that's also fine. You spoke, really eloquently this morning, Beef, about the fact that you've been through the last kind of decade or so trying things to rule them out of the running for when you do eventually retire, and that's just as valuable as finding things that you do like. So,
and I'll just jump in there. I think that's a really interesting point because not enough players, I believe, have done that. I never really did it. What I did do was, when we got opportunities to go into hospitality or I was dropped and I had to go into a box and do a player appearance, etc., I networked really well. I'm a people person and I kind of figured that out later on in my career. And that's one of the small opportunities where I feel players kind of see it as a negative. When you go into these hospitalities or you are dropped, let's try, okay, so what I'm going to do, who's going to be in that box? Potentially I could create another angle there, because people that do follow rugby are actually really willing to help and they actually really do care. And my other point is just regarding, what you're talking about, the doom and gloom side of things. Rugby it's a great sport, I mean, can't really say too much about it as of late because, it's going through a difficult period, I believe. But it's a great sport and it offers so much. But let's be honest, it's barbaric. How many players go through their career not getting injured? As you said, it doesn't become less easy. It doesn't become, less comfortable. It's a challenging sport. But what happens is you're able to adapt and evolve better. And you're able to do that with things like the RPA, but being able to have the confidence to actually go out there and seek help and use what I said before, the information that's at your fingertips,
I think it's interesting hearing you say it because I think these days, this crop of players over the last couple of years are probably under the most pressure that there has been in professional rugby. We've got, as you say, the game's in a bit of a dark spot at the moment. It's very much undergoing a reset, which it has to do, but these players are going to be, hopefully as part of the collective, they're going to be voicing their opinions and hopefully moulding the game into the way it should be. But social media is so prevalent now. Everything you do is scrutinised. Everything you do is seen. Some of these lads have already been viral leading up to that before they've even played their first Premiership game. So it's also difficult going from being that big fish in a relatively small pond in that age group stuff to coming into a professional environment where you assume that trajectory is going to stay the same. But inevitably there's going to be a drop off. You've got to gain experience. The Premiership itself is a huge leap in quality and again pressure. What things would you say to players to cope with that pressure? I suppose there's no real way of explaining what that pressure is until they're in it, but what coping mechanisms would you give to these young lads as they're coming through this period?
That's a really interesting question because what works for one may not work for another. So for these individuals, as we said, they're way, way, way more advanced athletically than my generation. So that's one tick. You want to get yourself in the best shape possible. Again, mental health is a huge part of the game. Like it's huge, and that's because the sport initially is just a roller coaster. Societal issues. There's a lot of things that just are complex in the world. So I think we have to make sure some of these players are mentally strong enough to deal with what's coming their way, because essentially that when you reach the top, it's much more brutal and cutthroat essentially, and they have to deal with things. They have to deal with criticism. They have to deal with positive criticism as well, and sometimes, these lads are going to come under scrutiny and it's going to be very tough for them. So when I talk about mental health, I think that is paramount. But I do think is not putting too much pressure on their shoulders as well. As we've spoken about earlier, you want to play the game because you love the game. Not see it as a job and it's essentially the rest of my life. It's something that you fall in love with as a young lad, and you have to somehow remember that throughout your career, because there's going to be difficult times, and you're going to come under a lot of stress and a lot of scrutiny, and it's just being able to gather as much information so you have the mental tools to be able to deal with certain situations that are thrown at you. So for me, for example, my life has been a complete ball of adversity. That's what I feel like. Don't get me wrong. I've had some amazing times. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, you've been there through some of my rough patches, mate, and it's just. I feel like right now I'm unbeatable. Yeah. I'm literally like, throw anything at me, it's fine, because I've been through so much adversity, and what you get from adversity is that huge amount of resilience. And so if you can keep building on your resilience and your tolerance to just keep getting back up, and yeah, things can affect you, but don't sit in that. Don't sit in it, learn how to pull yourself out of it and what works for you. It may not work for somebody else, but the amount of adversity, like I said, builds that resilience, and essentially you feel that you can tackle the majority of things that are thrown at you in your life.
And then I think on top of that is normalising the fact that things are going to get tough. For these young people, let's not forget that for this group of players actually we've got today, a big part of their life, a big part of their kind of the last 3 years, 4 years, with everything that went on with lockdown and COVID, that was a big change for them at the age of 14, 15. From a growth perspective, in terms of spending time with friends at school and things like that, and that was all affected. So we probably don't even know what the effects of that's going to look like at the moment. But I think one of the aspects of today is around recognising that it's okay not to feel completely in control, and actually it's an opportunity off the back of things that might be quite difficult to build that resilience, to build that that ability to deal with challenges. And beyond that, as your life progresses, we're sitting here all as parents, and kids start coming into the mix. That provides new exciting opportunities, but also new challenges as well. And I don't think we've got any parents in this current group of senior academy players. I might be wrong. I don't believe so. But that the next kind of part of their life should be something they're very, very excited about. And we're here to try and help them do that in the best way possible. Be the best rugby player they can possibly be, and grow to be the best person they can possibly be, knowing that they've always got the support of the RPA to back them up for whatever that might look like.
I agree. I think it's quite interesting because, as you say, they've got a hugely exciting path ahead of them. I think personally the game's going to get much stronger from here. There's a lot of development going on at the moment that's going to lead us towards hopefully a much brighter future and making England into one of the most desirable places to play rugby. And that'll be that will affect the careers of everyone here for the entirety of it. Fingers crossed in a positive way. But the starting sessions of this day are very much based around the pitfalls, as they should be, because to enjoy that excitement, enjoy that level of I'm trying to think of the right word, to enjoy the excitement, to enjoy the highest highs
the opportunity
of the game. That's the word. Thank you. You can edit that out. To enjoy the opportunities that they're going to get from this sport, they have to be able to have the longevity to stay in this game, and they can't fall into some of the easy pitfalls. I think one of my favourite sessions of these every single year, this one of the earliest ones, is the lesson on social media, which, as we said, very prevalent in this group. And I think this is the first year that the person that runs it hasn't got anything particularly incriminating off one of the players' Instagrams and put it up on the big screen, which is a step in the positive direction, in my opinion. But these are the kind of pitfalls they can fall in, and then they can go and enjoy the things like winning the premierships, winning trophies, winning tight games with their friends, and ultimately, as you said, they're creating the tightest bonds. When you were this age, what was your, and this is probably going to be the last one because we're going to have to wrap up to get back to the classes. What was your biggest ambition at this point in your career?
I was very, very much, I had tunnel vision, shall we say. So this is why I believe it's very different for this generation, because I was just rugby, rugby, rugby. I lived in a house. Jordan Crane was in my house. Danny Kerr was in the academy. Keenan Mile was there. And these were all unbelievable rugby players at that particular time. And I was like, I need to catch up with these guys, really. Like, what's going on? You know, these guys are playing first team rugby. I'm like, why am I not playing first team? I'm not good enough. And I was putting more pressure on myself. So, yeah, look, mate, it's been a very interesting morning from that perspective, because it's very different times. But look, for me, when I was coming through it was just all about rugby, and that's all I knew. Now, did that work for me? I believe it did, Ethan. I believe it did, because I came from a community where I didn't have much, and I knew one way for me to have a lot more was being a professional rugby player, because at that particular point, you know, World Cup had happened and rugby was really on the rise after the 2003 Rugby World Cup. I'm not that old. I was at school. I was at junior school when that was getting played. You know, so I'm not that old. But I mean, I was a kid watching the 2003 World Cup, and just to clarify, I was a child. And since that moment, rugby was on the rise, and I just had that tunnel vision. And it was because those guys had paved the way, and there was financial stuff, and I could look after my family because we didn't come from much, and my school was not the best, and I didn't have a good experience there. So rugby was my way of escaping the world, essentially. Would I have done things a bit differently if I'd had the opportunity? Potentially, yes, because I'm at the last stage now, well, the end, essentially, and you know, I'm now having to reinvent myself. I'm having conversations I probably should have had 10 years ago with certain people. Don't get me wrong, though. I'm still enjoying myself. And one thing I will say, just to wrap it up, is, you know, one thing we do have in life when you've made it as a professional rugby player is a leg up in most opportunities, right? People love the game, and people associate rugby players by being hard workers, good, genuine people, good morals, etc. So it does give us a leg up. So I would advise any up and coming rugby player to just, you know, jump into their community and their network and start now creating those relationships, because, you know, it's a relationship that could have such longevity, and set them up for, you know, life after rugby. You just never know.
Perfect. I think that drive is something that everyone needs to have, and clearly it paved you well for your career. I think today is about how do we keep that drive, but then also ensure that the other things don't necessarily get out of control. But we're going to have to wrap it up there. The syllabus awaits. So a big thank you to my guests, Luke and Luther. This has been The Player's Voice. If you want to hear anything in particular or any particular guests, please tweet us using hashtag The Player's Voice. But otherwise, thank you very much, gents, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening.
All best.
All best.
All best.